Hi everybody, and welcome back to video number 2 in chapter 5. And when we left off, we were looking at key concept number 2, and that was conversion costs. You'll remember conversion costs are direct labor and overhead. So reviewing that just a tad, direct labor costs are often small in comparison to other product costs in a process cost system. Okay, so therefore, direct labor and manufacturing overhead are often combined into one classification of product cost called conversion costs. The example below combines these costs pretty easily here. You can see the direct labor and manufacturing overhead comes into conversion cost. Nicely color coded so you can see the two added together here. Okay, so here's our dollars and here's our type of product cost. Okay, key concept number 3, equivalent units. Here, equivalent units are defined as the product of the number of partially completed units and the percentage of completion of those units. Stated in a little bit more easily understood manner, if I have 2 half glasses filled with water, the glasses are half filled, each one. I've got 2 of them. That's the equivalent of 1 full glass of water. Okay, so bravo here, equivalent units need to be calculated because a department usually has some partially completed units in its beginning and ending inventories. These partially completed units complicate the determination of a department's output for a given period and the unit cost that should be assigned to that output. Okay, so equivalent units. That's the number of partially completed units times the percentage completion. So in my little example, that was 2 half-filled glasses of water times 50% would give you 1 equivalent unit. So the equivalent unit, therefore, is the product of the number of partially completed units and the percentage completion of those units with respect to the processing in the department. The equivalent units is the number of complete units that could have been obtained from the materials and effort that went into the partially complete units. So, as an example, Department Alpha has 500 units in its ending work in process inventory that are 60% complete with respect to processing in that department. These 500 partially completed units are equivalent to 300 fully completed units. And we get that by taking the 500 units times the 60% completion to get to 300 equivalent units. Department Alpha's ending work in process inventory would contain 300 equivalent units for the period. Okay, very important concept. So make sure you understand that. So for the current period, Jones starts 15,000 units and completes 10,000 units, leaving 5,000 units in process, 30% complete. How many equivalent units of production did Jones have for the period? Okay, give you a chance to think that one through a little bit. And I think you're going to find its answer bravo. We have the 10,000 units that are 100% complete and 5,000 units that are 30% complete. 5,000 times 30% is going to give you 1,500 units, and we'll add that to the 10,000 units here to get 11,500 equivalent units. All right, now we're going to compute the equivalent units of production using the weighted average method. Here, Smith Company is going to report the following activity in the assembly department for the month of June. So here's our work in process at the beginning of the month. Here's the units we started into production in June. Here's the units that we completed and transferred out of Department Alpha during June. And here is our work in process ending. So the 300 units was 40% complete with respect to materials and 20% complete with respect to conversion. That would be direct labor and overhead. Whereas ending work in process was 60% complete with respect to materials and 30% complete with respect to conversion. So how do we convert this? Okay, we're going to begin by calculating the equivalent units completed and transferred out of the assembly department. Units completed and transferred out were 5,400 units. Those are 100% complete. So that's an easy calculation. Then we're going to take the work in process ending inventory at 60% complete. We have, let's go back, we have 900 units at 60% with materials and 30% with respect to conversion. So here, then, we're going to have 60% with respect to materials. So that would be 540 equivalent units. And then we are going to also have 900 units with respect to conversion at 30%, which results in 270 units. So our equivalent units of production in the department during June were different for materials and conversion. We had 5,940 for materials and 5,670 for conversion. Okay, the equivalent units of production always equals the units completed and transferred plus the equivalent units remaining in work in process. So here then is that calculation again. Units completed and transferred out, work in process at 60% with respect to materials and 30% with respect to conversion. The equivalent units of production, therefore, during June are the totals we just went through. Okay, now the equivalent units of production for materials. Here, we're going to start with beginning work in process of 300 units that was 40% complete. 5,100 that was started and completed. And then our ending work in process, which was 60% complete. So they're going through that calculation again, this time showing you that we're not considering the beginning work in process in this calculation here. We're assuming that that is going to ripple through work in process during the month. So 5,400 is completed, 540 equivalent units, and so we got 5,940 equivalent units of production. Now for conversion, same idea. This time though, ending work in process is 30% complete, and we add that to the 5,400 units completed to get to 5,670 equivalent units of production. All right, now we're going to compute the cost per equivalent units using the weighted average method. Here, our beginning work in process, materials, 6,119, conversion 3,920, production started during June was 6,000. What we completed during June was 5,400. Costs added to production, materials cost was $118,621, and conversion costs, labor and overhead, were $81,130. You'll remember that our ending work in process inventory was 900 units, right? With materials 60% complete, conversion 30% complete. Okay, now that we've set up the problem, the formula for computing the cost per equivalent unit then is using the weighted cost method. And a separate calculation is made for each category in each processing department. So the cost per equivalent unit is going to be the cost of beginning work in process inventory plus the costs added during the period divided by the equivalent units of production. So the numbers that we got for total costs were $10,039 for work in process June, and the cost added into assembly was $199,751 total cost, $209,790. We break that into its two components, materials and conversion, and we have $124,740 for total materials cost and $85,050 for conversion costs. Once we've broken that down, then what we can do, now let me just go back to have you review the numbers a little bit as to where we got those. And there they are. Give you a second to assimilate that. Okay, so now that's where we get these numbers, and then we total them here. And so now it's just an easy case of dividing through by the equivalent units. Okay, so here's a schedule that does that. Here's our total costs again, same numbers, here, here, and here. We divide that through by the equivalent units, here and here. And that gives us cost per equivalent unit of $21 for materials and $15 for conversion, labor, and overhead. That total is $36 cost per equivalent unit. Okay, now we're going to assign those costs to units using the weighted average method. And here are our equivalent units, 540, 270, that we calculated previously in the assembly department. So that's the cost of ending work in process inventory and the units transferred out. So what we do is we multiply $21 times 540 units, equivalent units for material, and $15 times 270 equivalent units for conversion. And that gives us a total cost of ending work in process inventory of $11,340 for materials and $4,050 for equivalent or for cost of ending work in process for conversion. Total $15,390. Okay, now we also completed and transferred out 5,400 units. Very easy calculation here. We'll multiply those times those same costs per equivalent unit, and that gives us $113,400 for materials and $81,000 for conversion. Total $194,400 for total. That looks like a good place for us to end this video, and when we return, we'll take a look at preparing a cost reconciliation report using the weighted average method. Until that time, bye for now.